I just replaced the fuel injectors on my 2001 Citroen Xsara VTS, and now it runs rich. But what exactly does that mean, and how do I know? Well, to show you what it means, I'm going to utilize a very technologically complex software. So, in an engine, multiple pistons, all enclosed in cylinders, make 4 distinct strokes per each revolution, or rev. Generally speaking, most modern cars have about 3 or 4 cylinders, but some could have more in all different configurations. So, on the first stroke, the pistons draw air and fuel into the cylinder through the intake valve. Then, on the second stroke, they compress that air-fuel mixture. And then, on the third stroke, bang! The spark plug ignites that mixture and pushes the piston down. That's what creates the sound that comes out of your exhaust. And then on the fourth and final stroke, the piston comes back up through angular momentum and pushes the exhaust gases out of the exhaust valve. And that's what makes the smell. And the gases. Each one of those bangs in stroke 3 is also called a cylinder firing or a pulse, and this is mainly referred to as the power stroke, since obviously that's where the power comes from, and each cylinder in an engine fires at a different time, all in a set order. That is simplifying the process a fair bit, but that's not what you came here to learn about. So let's move on to running rich. If the pistons draw in too much fuel, that can cause a load of problems, primarily a loss in performance, since most of the components aren't designed for that much fuel in a multitude of different ways. It also causes increased fuel consumption, obviously, and increased emissions, which nobody cares about. Specifically, it creates a very strong smell of petrol out of the exhaust, since some of the fuel isn't being burnt in the power stroke or stroke 3. Because it's not used in stroke 3, that means it goes out the exhaust and it gets burnt on the hot exhaust components. Running rich also causes carbon deposits or carbon buildup, and these mainly form on the top of the piston and on the spark plug, unless of course you drive like a madman, like me. Carbon deposits are basically a sooty sort of coating that lands on the piston and the spark plug, and that comes from some of the fuel not being burnt, which is of course what happens when you run rich. Now, if your car is running lean, as in it's not getting enough fuel, that's a whole different can of worms and a whole different set of problems. But this video is focusing on running rich, since that's what my French piece of shit is currently doing. Just quickly though, the reason this usually isn't a problem in modern cars with fuel injection is because the car's brain, the electronic control unit, also called the ECU, will usually try to keep to a consistently good air-fuel ratio. Generally speaking, a decent air-fuel ratio is around 14 or 13 parts of air for 1 part of fuel. Of course though, the ECU isn't always perfect, and in some cases, like mine, where we probably accidentally put in bigger injectors which are made for more power, running rich can sometimes manifest in modern fuel-injected cars. However, it was a much more prevalent issue in carbureted cars, because they had a manually or mechanically adjustable air-fuel ratio. Now, how can you tell if your car is running rich? As I mentioned before, one of the first things you're going to notice is a very strong smell out of the exhaust. Other than that, the car will also sputter under small throttle inputs, which is a result of the fuel that isn't burnt in stroke 3 getting into the exhaust, causing backfiring. This can happen when starting the engine, when taking off from a stop, when applying some small amount of throttle while moving, for instance during a gear change, and really any point where you're in lower RPM. That's the thing, at higher RPM and with more throttle input, the effects of running rich are actually less noticeable. This is since the engine draws in more air, which can help compensate for the increased amount of fuel. Now, that's not to say you shouldn't drive everywhere with a lead foot if your car does run rich, or at least don't drive super hard until it warms up. Usually your car will properly warm up about a few minutes after your coolant temperature gauge reaches operating temperature, or about the middle, in this case 90 degrees Celsius. Primarily you're waiting for the oil to warm up. My car has an oil temperature gauge, so I don't need to worry about this, but of course if yours doesn't, which most modern cars don't, then that's how you can know when it is truly warm. Now, another way that running rich can affect the engine's performance is here in the power band. It can do some very, very strange things. Generally speaking, this is what a power band would look like. You've got your torque in blue, which peaks around the mid-range and then trails off, and you've got your horsepower in yellow, which peaks near the top end. But when you're running rich, some odd things can happen. For instance, in my car, there's quite a large flat spot in power around 3,300 RPM. Basically, I'll go up to 3,200, it's fine, I'll keep going. Then I hit 3,300 and the car will it'll stop accelerating for a second, and then it'll keep going. This is due to the car's engine map going back to the ECU. The ECU will have a map for how much fuel to give the engine at specific RPM and specific throttle positions. This all kind of breaks when you have an issue that makes your car run rich. The ECU will try and fix it to do its absolute best it can, but it can't create a new map. The final main sign is terrible fuel economy. Thanks to my surprisingly advanced French lad, you can actually see this in real time right here. There are some other signs to tell you that your car is running rich, but for me, those ones were the most obvious. Anyway, that's about all. I hope this video was helpful, and thank you for watching. Next up, I'm going to get my car remapped, well, eventually anyway, and we're going to see if it's any faster by doing some acceleration tests. See you all later.